Hey there. Thank you for joining me for the Friday meditation. It's Friday of Holy Week. And on Good Friday, we remember a moment that can only possibly be called good in hindsight. We remember the moment where Jesus was taken to trial, falsely convicted. He was mocked, he was beaten, and then ultimately he was tortured and killed. And I think it's easy for us to look at the things that go on at Good Friday. We don't have to sensationalize them. Honestly, I don't think that we need to have the, Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ type depiction to be able to get an idea of how horrific this moment was. We experience these moments all the time. The loss of a loved one. Knowing that there's someone in your life who you can't help and they are going to suffer. Jesus on the cross sees his mother, Mary, who's now going to have lost her child and be left alone. Having friends desert you, having a friend betray you, having people make fun of you and mock you, getting physically injured, getting physically beaten up by other people. These are experiences that we have. Having our bodies fall apart on us are experiences that we have. We know these experiences. We say that Jesus took all of sin upon himself onto the cross, but I think we so minimize what that actually means. Because Jesus didn't just take our bad actions onto the cross with him and the punishment for those. Jesus took all of sin, all of evil, all of injustice, all of suffering, all shame. He took all of that onto the cross with him. There's not a single thing that humanity suffers, that humanity ever has suffered, that humanity ever will suffer, that didn't come onto Jesus on the cross. The full weight of everything that it means for the world to be fallen, God laid on to Jesus on the cross. And when I say that there was nothing humanity suffers that Jesus didn't suffer, well, Mark's gospel is an interesting way of showing this. One of the last words that Jesus speaks that Mark's gospel tells us about, Mark's gospel says, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "It is finished." And this "it is finished," it's kind of like it's perfected, it's completed. But there aren't that many characters in Mark's gospel who cry out in loud voices. In fact, if you want to find a character in Mark's gospel who cries out in a loud voice, you're going to find someone who's possessed by a demon. And whether demons were just kind of a personification of evil at that time, whether you think that there's really a personal demonic force or not, that experience, that pain, that level of suffering, of demonic oppression, Jesus even suffered that on the cross. All evil, even evil personified, all suffering, even suffering of the mind, the likes of which few of us understand, all pain, his body is physically breaking down moment by moment, all sadness, all relational mistrust, all of it comes on to Jesus on Good Friday. There is not a single thing that any human suffers that God doesn't understand, because Jesus felt every bit of it. There's nothing that you're going through that Jesus doesn't feel. sometimes I have a habit of responding, I know, when someone tells me something that um, it's just really hard. It's kind of my wording of letting them know, hey, like, it's okay for you to hurt. But I had a church member tell me, no, it's not that you know. You understand. You you can empathize with it. You see that, but you don't know it. I think we feel that a lot with our suffering. Like, yeah, okay, like you can imagine it. That was the word. You can imagine it. You can imagine someone suffering this way. You can imagine this type of pain. You can kind of mentally create a construct for the thing that's being suffered, but you don't know my pain. You don't know my feeling. And for me, that can be true. I don't know all types of pain and suffering. I haven't been through all of those things. And so now I try to respond with, I can imagine. Because that is a more accurate way of saying what I mean. But God never has to say that. God doesn't have to look at you and say, well, I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine it. God knows. Because in Jesus, every bit of it was suffered on the cross. And on Good Friday, we remember the moment where all of that, all of evil, sin, pain, suffering, all of that goes on to Jesus on the cross and then takes Jesus to the grave. Now, that story, again, it's a story we all know. And for us, when we witness that story, we know what thing can escape the grave. And it's not the person. The human person doesn't go into a grave because of sickness or suffering or pain, and the human person walk out. The disciples watched Jesus go into the grave after all of human suffering ended up on him. The disciples didn't know that all that suffering was on Jesus, but the disciples see Jesus physically suffer. The disciples know they abandoned him. The disciples know somewhat of what ends up on Jesus on the cross. And Jesus goes into the grave, and they think the story's going the same way. Now, we know the rest of the story, as a famous radio show used to say. But on this Good Friday, I want us to rest on Friday. And I want you to hear, yes, your sin and all of your mistakes and all of the bad actions that you've done, whether you meant to or not, yes, all of those went on to Jesus on the cross. And the penalty for those went on to Jesus on the cross. I'm not denying that. That is certainly true. But so much more is on Jesus on the cross. On the cross, Jesus accepted the death of a loved one that you've not been able to get over. On the cross, Jesus accepted the relational turmoil that you're feeling right now. On the cross, Jesus accepted the betrayal that you never thought was going to happen but happened to you. On the cross, Jesus accepted the words those people say to you that just can't get out of your head. On the cross, Jesus accepted that shameful thing that happened to you that never should have happened, that's completely unexcusable, but that eats you up every moment of every day. On the cross, all of that pain, all of the shame, all of that suffering went on to Jesus. And now when Jesus looks at you, he doesn't say, wow, I can imagine that. That has to be hard. Jesus looks at you and says, I know. I know that hurts. I know how hard that is. I have lived that pain before. So on this Good Friday, my prayer for you, my prayer for all of us, is that we'll take a moment to take that pain that we feel so deep inside and take it to Jesus, because he's already taken it to the cross. Will you open up that pain for Jesus today? Thank you for joining me in these Holy Week reflections. God bless you.